Hey everyone, RogueGold here. What a week so far. I hope any of you who have dived into Year 6 Season 1 so far are having a good time, but before we begin covering that update in greater detail, I wanted to sit down and follow up on what has easily become the most discussed and hotly contested topic following the game's announcements this week at Ubisoft Forward. That being that part of the game's plans for Seasons 2.0, which is slated for the Year 6 Season 2 update in a couple of months from now, includes the concept of us using seasonal characters to access seasonal content moving forward. Now, if that all sounds completely brand new to you and you didn't catch some of the announcements and coverage earlier in the week, then I definitely encourage you to check that all out first so that you have at least a basic understanding of what the development team's plans are, what's being pitched here. I'll leave a link to the video I did breaking it all down up in the upper corner and down in the description. But ever since we got this news and ever since the detail about seasonal characters specifically dropped, there has been a lot of outrage from the community, along with endless questions being asked about how this is all going to work. And something I want to say right off the bat is that I think if there's one area that almost all of us can likely agree with, regardless of if you're more positive towards the idea they're proposing or you're completely against it, is that the ball was dropped in terms of how this is all communicated. A change of this magnitude that shifts how we interact with the game on such a fundamental level necessitates a level of coverage and requires much greater detail than what they were able to do in the Ubisoft Forward presentation. Now, I don't know if that was the dev team's decision to reveal what they did, how they did at Ubi Forward, if that was something that corporate mandated, but whoever made the call, in my opinion, it would have been much better for them to say nothing at all if they weren't ready or were unable to simultaneously provide much greater insight into how this is all going to work. But unfortunately, that's not how things played out, and so here we are, like I said, with many people not feeling too receptive to the idea of these changes, and with a bunch of outstanding questions on things. There's two main things that I want to try and achieve in this video. For one, since Ubisoft Forward back on Monday, the team has begun answering some of the pressing topics surrounding Seasons 2.0 and seasonal characters on Twitter, putting to bed some of the more dire skepticisms and fears with this whole system. So I want to cover that information and hopefully put some of you at ease in regards to those things specifically. And then two, expand my thoughts regarding this entire situation. Many of you had many thoughts about my reaction to these changes in that initial video, some less civil about it than others, and look, I'm not trying to hide anything. For the most part, I am looking forward to the ideas that they presented. For the type of player that I am and for the things that attract me to games like The Division 2, the changes they're proposing in Seasons 2.0 sound far more compelling to me than the current seasonal system that we have. However, in this video I want to try and do a better job articulating some of my thoughts and reasoning there, as well as acknowledge that my reaction and my train of thought on this stuff is far from the only one. There are many players out there and many of you who watch my videos who have expressed disappointment at various aspects of this, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. So, as we get into the meat of this, I can only kindly ask one thing of you, and that is that if you have the time, watch this video in its entirety. I've disabled monetization on it so you won't get any ads. Truly take in all of the details and information that we have at this point, hear my perspective on things, and then, as always, leave your counterpoints, rebuttals, or any other general thoughts in the comments below. I do not, nor do I ever, expect people to blindly agree with my perspective on things with this game, but for those of you who have watched me for a while, you'll know that I'm not a believer in the blind rage kind of approach when it comes to giving feedback on game development. Without proper discourse and without fully taking into account the details of what's being proposed, then we can't accurately criticize or praise anything. So let's really get into this. And I want to begin with a checklist of truths and mistruths, if you will. Basically going down the list and setting the record straight on some things that the community has largely been saying that are true about Seasons 2.0 and things that are not. And just to clarify, I'm not blaming any player if they've been led to believe something that is actually incorrect here. As I said at the start, I think a much better job could have been done communicating all of this stuff, and that's evident by just how many people thought that Seasons 2.0 was launching this week with Year 6 Season 1. Like I said, it was just so much info packed into such a brief teaser that it left many dazed. So, let's go down the list here. First off, the idea that Seasons 2.0 is going to cause you to lose characters or progression that you've already earned or accumulated in the game. This is not true. As confirmed by the team on Twitter, when this system goes live, we will be getting a 5th character slot. So if you're somebody who already has 4 characters, you won't need to delete one to accommodate this new system. Next up, Seasons 2.0 completely invalidates and makes it so that your existing and main characters no longer serve any purpose. This is not true. Now, yes, it is true that a lot of the focus will be shifting to these new seasonal characters if you want to experience the game's ongoing story and the new seasonal rewards in the update that they arrive in. But as detailed by the team on Twitter, the new Master difficulty content that we discussed back on Monday, that is accessible and intended to be played by your main characters once you unlock it via your seasonal character. Meaning that all of the optimized builds, expertise levels, whatever, that's being kept in mind and is intended to be applied to this new difficulty tier of content. And during season intermission periods, as they're calling them, the game will transition back to exclusively having you play on your main characters. And of course, on top of all of that, nothing is changing with how your main characters experience the game as we know it. Once Seasons 2.0 goes live, you can continue to play your main characters all you want, whenever you want. Next up, the notion that the game is quote-unquote forcing you to reset your progression and roll an all-new character. I would say this is partially true and partially untrue. Once Seasons 2.0 goes live, the game will not force you to make a new seasonal character. If you do not want to, you do not have to, and you can continue playing the game as you like. However, seasonal characters will have access to a few exclusive things that your main characters will no longer be able to access. For one, the ongoing story and manhunt content will be exclusively available for seasonal characters. Additionally, the new rewards that a season brings on its reward track that will only be available to seasonal characters for the duration of that introductory season. It's worth noting that when a season concludes, however, it can be assumed that those things will then become available to main characters and the rest of the game, right? In the same way that Kelso's manhunt mission at the Stranded Tanker just got permanently unlocked for everybody at rank 1 on the latest season reward track, the climax mission of each new season will presumably unlock for everyone once that season concludes, and any new brand sets, gear sets, exotics, etc. should enter into the general loot pool to be farmed and used by anyone. So if anything, aside from the actual manhunt steps to reach the climax mission, everything that seasonal characters can unlock and play will eventually be available to main characters after that exclusivity period. The only thing that main characters won't experience from the information we have so far is the gameplay modifiers and other tweaks that each season will be themed around, as well as, like I mentioned, the new manhunt scout content leading up to the climax mission. And then, last up for this list, the idea that seasonal characters are simply making you grind a new character at the same speed, doing the same content in the way that the base game's campaign presents it to you. This is not true. From the information released, one of the central goals of introducing this new system is to allow the team to give refreshed experiences and create actual surprises, as opposed to the mostly samey seasons we have now. This includes an accelerated 1 to 40 leveling experience. So let's say, and keep in mind these are all hypothetical numbers until we get more details, but if going from level 1 to 40 would maybe take you 40 hours in the live game today, maybe on a seasonal character that would only take 10, 15, or 20 hours. And in addition, you're not just playing the campaign linearly over and over and over. Instead, they're going to curate a unique list of objectives and content each season that serves as that campaign progression experience. So maybe that would look something like doing 2 to 3 hand-selected main missions for the game's roster, then some open-world activities like bounties and control points. Then the game will tell you to go to the summit and do a few objectives there, then you play a round of Countdown, right? The seasonal progression experience is designed to be continually refreshed to break up the monotony for veterans, while also serving almost as a tour around the block for newcomers to highlight each of the key features and content pieces that the game has to offer. Again, a lot of this you had to read between the lines of the article and the other released information to put together, and that was the big shortcoming in my opinion of how this entire reveal and presentation was handled, but that's the gist of the progression flow. And on top of that, each season is bringing these different modifiers to the gameplay experience. Once again, we were provided with no concrete examples to highlight, which sucks, but they've said that these modifiers will impact both our agents and the enemies that we fight. So maybe enemies are more susceptible to long-range damage, but to compensate they move faster. Or our agents take more damage out of cover, but we get some kind of cool charged melee attack. I literally have no idea, but the gameplay flow of each season should feel noticeably different and encourage you to play differently with different builds. Okay, so with some of those frequently asked questions covered, let's now shift over towards my thoughts on this all. Again, like I mentioned earlier, and as I said in my initial video, I am receptive towards these changes. I think it sounds like an exciting new way to reinvigorate the game. But the first thing I want to say here is that even though that's the case, I do fully understand people's main and central complaint and pushback point on this proposal, and that's that the entire premise of this system shifts a lot of the game's focus away from the characters that we've built up for the past 5.5 years, and all of the loot, builds, and progressions that we've invested into. And even though there is stuff like the master difficulty content that they're making with our existing characters in mind, I completely get it that the notion of having our main characters not being able to access any kind of new content they're releasing, it's a shock. And at the end of the day, I think for some of you, nothing that the devs announce or explain in addition or on top of that one fact will likely change your perception on the overall system, unfortunately. So, why do I overall like the ideas then, as somebody who's invested a crap ton of time into this game, obviously? And I mean, it's also probably worth noting that I'm a big main character believer, whether it was my time in The Division 1 or Destiny before that, or World of Warcraft before that. Aside from making an alt character for some random reason now and then, I have never been the kind of player to juggle and regularly play multiple multiple tunes. So why would I be okay or receptive to it now? I think it comes down to a couple of things. The first reason, like we covered in the last section, is that the idea of having refreshed and curated seasonal progression every few months in this game is enticing to me. Compared to how things are right now, just yesterday I spent a few hours running public executions out in the open world with the same build that I always do to max out my season pass, and after that, then I'm basically done with the content of the season. So to think about that experience that we've had a dozen times now, in contrast to the concept of a curated content selection with these gameplay modifiers to change and enhance how I experience the game each season while I rank up my pass and earn rewards, yeah, I'd much rather prefer that. Now the argument could be made, and I've already seen it a few times around the community, why couldn't they essentially do this exact same thing except for our main characters instead of these brand new seasonal ones that we'd have to level up? The short answer is, I see no reason why they theoretically couldn't. If that is the direction that they wanted to go in, they probably could create some kind of comparable experience for our main characters to play. But there's one striker-sized elephant in the room here, and that's balancing. After 5.5 years of playing, we as players have gotten incredibly strong, whether it's through stronger build options like Striker, like the Memento backpack, like whatever else, or through progression systems like Expertise. The dials on our power has turned up a lot, and as the community has made abundantly clear time and time again, any attempts to turn those dials back down is not welcomed. Anytime that any sort of nerf is proposed for the sake of trying to maintain a semblance of challenge or balance in the game, there is a huge uproar, and more often than not, whatever was being floated doesn't end up happening. And that's how you end up with clips like this, which was me running the first Echo target for the Keener Manhunt this season on stream earlier this week. Now I acknowledge that not everybody chooses to or can play like this, but you can't deny that for a long time now, a lot of players have found their rhythm, found their preferred builds, and just know the existing game far too well for it to be able to challenge them or prove to be overly dynamic in any sort of regular content. So while yes, I'm sure that in theory these new experiences could have been made for our main characters instead, if nerfs are something that the community has taken off of the table, then I'm not sure how any level of modifiers or curated content objectives can cut through the sheer strength that we've accumulated and provide any kind of new or interesting gameplay flows without making everything feel like legendary difficulty, which I'm sure a lot of you would not want. And so what we'd likely end up see happening is that people continue to more or less play the same way and not really feel like much changed. Just the other day, I started off a new character as I wanted to make a video covering some of the new progression flow for the one endgame change made with Year 6 Season 1. And I'm not kidding when I say that it felt really refreshing to have a lot of my power and armor stripped, and to step back into that fantasy of playing as a Division agent again with some truly hostile environments and factions. So if that's the kind of experience that they want to provide, with rotating objectives, with these modifiers to enhance and change the already superb base gameplay, then yeah, 5.5 years in, I would be okay with deprioritizing my main character in order to gain a greatly improved and renewed enjoyment of my moment-to-moment gameplay. That doesn't mean that I 100% love the idea of largely leaving behind all of that progression, but for me, knowing that we have stuff like master difficulty content to play on those characters, and to know there will be periods of time where they're going to be the only characters available in between seasons, I'm okay with it. Now, I don't want to drag this on longer than it needs to be, but the one other element to this that does really entice me, and again, I recognize that not all of you might feel the same way on this is coming from the perspective of a long-time and hardcore player, but I enjoy games like The Division and Destiny before it in large part because of their looter-shooter natures. I like the grind. I chase that feeling of investing my time and finally pulling that rare loot drop that I can then feel impact my performance and gameplay moving forward. And in The Division 2 as it stands, that entire aspect to the game really just hasn't been there for me for a long time. Like I said, we can grind out new season passes in a day, getting all of the new gear and exotics. And with there being no gear score in the game, while that's great to not create these big gaps in returning in new player power levels, it means that whenever they do add stuff, it's horizontally. Sure, we might get an awesome and new strong item every now and then, like the St. Elmo's or the Ouroboros, but when I slot those into my maxed out striker pieces or whatever other strong builds we have, does it really feel all that different than a FAMAS, than an Eagle Bearer? Do I really feel that unique and special when I see 10 dozen other players running those same new weapons in their launch weeks? Not really. And so, under the idea of this new model, if we are re-leveling and growing our arsenal and power each season, think about how much of a renewed purpose loot could have again. Items like the Dark Winter, for example, suddenly actually are rare once again. And if you see someone running it, or if you're lucky enough to get it for yourself, that could make a noticeable difference in your gameplay when paired with a non-optimized build. Or even think about those rarer drops like an Eagle Bear or an Ouroboros. In a 15 to 19 week season, however long these end up being, if you grind and acquire one of those items, you might be in a very small percentage of players who actually has them, of course within the seasonal character pool. And so if you take that into PvP or more prestige PvE content, again, you're much more likely to feel a direct and impactful change in your gameplay and power. And frankly, I miss that feeling from this game. I just do. Alright, well those are most of my expanded thoughts on this entire matter. I really hope that helped to better articulate some of how I'm viewing this for those of you who were off-put by my original response to this news back on Monday. I do hope many of you are still tuned in at this point though, as I do have one final message and point that I want to convey here, and that is to say, once again, that I wholeheartedly believe that the deliverance and communication of these proposed changes was mishandled. And in many ways, even with the additional information they shared on Twitter, there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered before I personally believe that myself, or any of you listening, should come to any definitive conclusions, right? Just because I'm receptive to what we've heard so far doesn't mean that there isn't still a lot of information needing to come out that could sway my viewpoint. A short list of topics here that I've gathered up from reading many community forums and threads. How will progression systems like the Recal Library, the SHD Watch, and Expertise work with seasonal characters? Do they transfer? Are we forced to start over each time? How will stash space work? We know that we're getting an additional character slot, and that at the end of each season those characters and the rewards they earn will transition in some way to main characters. But does this mean that we get more space to store it all? Is it merged? Do we have to choose? How will this system work with future content additions? The devs stated pretty clearly that all of this is foundational changes they're making to support the game's future. So when the Brooklyn DLC drops, or things like incursions or game modes if we get more of that stuff in year 7 or beyond, can we access that content day one with our main characters? Will it be tied to the seasonal progression? Might they be locked to seasonal for a certain period of time? And those are just some of what I'm sure are many more valid and important questions. So once again, I think the reveal of this should have been done at a time and in a place where they could share many more of these details in the hopes of quelling some of the community outrage and confusion, but that's not what happened, so we can only take what we've got and move on. And that's why, in my view, all of us, regardless of if you're for or against this system based off of initial impressions, should wait for further details. Or even better, for when this is featured on a public test server, which I'm sure they'll do before Year 6 Season 2 goes live, to actually see how everything works together in one package. Make a determination when we have all of the available information, and leave our feedback based off of that accordingly. Because at the end of the day, we can talk all we want about it right now, but literally everything could flip on its head if we suddenly get some key new detail that they previously didn't share. So, as I encourage with most things that we talk about here, wait until you get your hands on it to actually try it out for yourself and make up your minds from there. That's all I've got on this one, my friends. If you did make it all the way through, then I sincerely appreciate it. I tried to be as concise as possible, but there was a lot that I wanted to cover and say. So now, as promised, I turn the mic over to all of you. Please let me know your full thoughts and responses to everything that we covered in this video down below. As usual, I kindly ask that we keep all of our discussions here civil. However you might be feeling about all of this, there's never a warranted reason for going out and personally attacking one another or the developers. This is a video game. At the end of the day, life has much more important things to offer. And as much as we all love The Division, like I said, there's no reason to devolve things into name-calling when I know that we're all capable of being far more constructive with our words and time. That's everything that I've got on Seasons 2.0 and seasonal characters for now, folks. I anxiously await reading through all of your thoughts on it, and I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Out.